Hello and welcome to Chapter 2. So this is kind of when we are officially starting our first unit of trying to understand who our students are developmentally. In order to be a good teacher, it's really important to understand who your students are. So we're going to begin by looking at social and emotional development. This first class is going to be giving you an introduction to the field of human development. And it's going to be looking at how the social world can impact your personal development. And then part 2 is going to be looking at the role of parents. So I'm going to go back up into the corner and let's get started. So I'm calling this one Introduction to Human Development and Social Influences. So again, our topics are going to be understanding what this area of research is that we call human development and looking at the role of social context. So the field of human development is a separate field within psychology. In fact, my PhD is within the field of lifespan human development, so focusing from birth until death. But my area of specialty was in infants, toddlers, and young children. So within the field of human development, what we study are all the different ways that we grow and develop, including cognitive processes, so mentally, how you think, how you learn, how that changes over time, physically and biologically, and then social-emotional. And we're going to really, for this class, just be focusing on cognitive and social-emotional. So why do we study human development? You might be thinking, I'm going to be a teacher. Why do I need to know this? Well, this is actually a very helpful field for teachers because it helps you to understand not only who your students are, but what you can expect out of them. When you go into a 4th grade classroom, don't you think it would be helpful to understand what 4th graders are like? And what are some typical age-specific attitudes and behaviors that you might see in these students? So for instance, let's say one of your first teaching jobs or just maybe even a summer job is working with preschoolers. And you happen to notice that these preschoolers spend a lot of time fighting and arguing and they have a hard time taking turns and sharing. It's kind of easy to then assume that, wow, preschoolers are kind of bratty. Unless you understand them developmentally. Developmentally, we'll be learning this, preschoolers are unable to put themselves in someone else's shoes. It's a cognitive limitation. They just don't know how to do that yet. So when they're saying my turn, my toy, me, it's not that they're being selfish. They just simply don't know that other people think and feel differently yet. And once you know that, you're going to treat those preschoolers differently and be more helpful to them. So, principles of human development. First one, development typically occurs in a pretty organized, orderly fashion. And because it is orderly, for instance, we learn how to crawl before we walk. We all start to have our first words around the age of 1. Because those things are orderly, that means that human development is kind of predictable, which is nice. There's not a lot of things in human behavior that is predictable, but human development is one. So ask yourself, here's just a little demo. When did you start puberty? And obviously we're not going to raise our hands and share, but just think to yourself. And by the way, that meme just cracked me up. But, well, did you know that on average, puberty begins around the age of 10 or 12 and lasts until the age of 15 or 16? So you might have been earlier than that, you might have been a little bit later than that, but in general, it starts around 10 or 12 for all of us because it is organized and predictable. And development does tend to occur in a predictable way. So, keeping that in mind though, we're not all identical. Children do develop at different rates. That's why we have early bloomers and late bloomers. So yes, we know puberty begins around 10 or 12, but you will see differences because again, we're not all robots. We're not identical. So that is thankfully what gives us our individuality. How boring would it be if we all did the exact same thing? So ask yourself, do you remember in middle school, during this time of puberty, some of your friends having their growth spurt before others, and then suddenly you look over and it could have even been you, but you have a classmate or two that is suddenly so much taller than everyone else? That's because of individuality. So yes, there are some orderly patterns that occur, but individuality is a good thing, and some of us go through things earlier or later than others. So here's an example. Boys typically begin puberty 2 years later than girls, and they usually have slower growth in height. So there's this time period where girls are taller than the boys. Now, this is not a picture I stole off the internet. These were actually two good friends of mine in middle school, and this was taken at our middle school prom. And I'm still friends with them today. And it's obviously very noticeable, the height difference and the maturity difference here, because, again, some of us are early bloomers and some of us are late bloomers. The third principle of human development. Development is gradual. It does not occur overnight. You're not going to wake up one morning and you've just hit your growth spurt and you're 3 inches taller. It is very slow and gradual. And it includes what we call plateaus, time periods where no growth is happening, and even declines. Development is not just about growth. It is a lot of things. It's ups and it's downs. So can you think of an area of human development that does tend to show a decline with age? Maybe thinking about your parents or your grandparents. Well, there are quite a few. In fact, we do start to get a tiny bit shorter as we get older. Our memory span, or especially our short-term memory, tends to be elapsed. So there are areas that do show decline, and that's still considered human development. What about a plateau? A time where you're kind of steady state. Well, height does hit a steady state during middle adulthood, early middle adulthood. IQ also tends to hit a plateau. Here's a nice chart showing you the development of self-esteem over time. And self-esteem is, do you feel good about yourself or not? And so you can see, let me get my laser pointer. So you can see here, this point here is early in life, around the age of 9. That is one of the highest points in your self-esteem. When you're young, you tend to feel very good about yourself. It drops dramatically around, and that drop occurs at the beginning around puberty. Then you'll notice it really steadies off through the 20s and the 30s. It increases again through the 50s and 60s and then declines. So development can do a lot of different things. And finally, human development is affected by both your genetic, which we also call heredity, we also call it nature, and it can also be affected by your environment, which is also called nurture. This is the great nature-nurture debate. If you ever take a history class in intro psych, you'll learn this. There are some theorists who believe that it was all one way or the other, but we do know today that both are equally important. I like to point out that some of the very interesting research, from my opinion, looking at the power of nature or the power of genetics is twin studies. The University of Minnesota was very well known for doing separated at birth twin studies. So what happens when you have two twins that are given up for adoption and raised by two totally different families, identical twins, and then they get reunited when they're adults? Well, if they were raised in two very different environments and they still have similarities, you'd have to think that some of those similarities might be due to their genes. Down below are a picture of two very famous twins from this study. They are the Jim Lewis and Jim Springer twins. And you can see once they met, and they were, I think, in their 30s or 40s when they met, you can see some of the crazy similarities they had. They both bit their fingernails. They both had migraine headaches. They had the same job. They had the same hobbies. They went to the same beach for vacation. And they both scored almost identically on things like personality and intelligence. So, nature does play a huge role, but we'll see that so does nurture. All right, so that's the first part of this particular lesson. The second part is looking at something called Bronfenbrenner's model. So Bronfenbrenner's model, let me back up, is where we start to look at nurture. Okay, so the slide before with the twins was talking about nature, the role of genetics, but here is the role of the environment, which includes your social world. So this is called Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model, very fancy term, and basically what he's talking about is that our social world is similar to an ecosystem. You can compare it to an ecosystem. And because of that, our social worlds influence us. They interact with each other. They influence each other. It's this great dynamic world that we live in that makes up our nature and makes us who we are. Here's a super short video to introduce Bronfenbrenner.
Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. Uri Bronfenbrenner was an American psychologist who is known for co-founding the Head Start program, as well as developing his ecological systems theory. This theory used to be strictly ecological, but he later included biological aspects, making it the bioecological theory. This theory states that development reflects the influence of many environmental systems. In this theory, there are 4 environmental systems: the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem. These systems are embedded into each other and get bigger and bigger as they branch out.
So let's take a look at each of those. And again, there are a lot of ways you can depict his model. You're welcome to draw one of these in your notes if you want. There's probably a good picture of one in our textbook as well. But let's start with a short little demo. Ask yourself, what people in your life have had the most direct impact on you personally, on your personal growth, on who you are? And by direct impact, I mean when something happens to them, it affects you. Well, if you were thinking about parents, aunts, uncles, maybe if you're very close to them, siblings, friends, you're on the right track. That is your inner circle, according to Bronfenbrenner. And that's what I have a picture of right here. Okay, so here's the individual, who you are, your personality, your health, all that sort of stuff. The very first level of Bronfenbrenner's model is called your microsystem. So this is, again, your inner circle. And this is your immediate relationships. Whoever it is that has the most direct impact on you. And that's going to vary for each of us. It could be, again, things like your parents and siblings. If you're very tight-knit with your church, it could be church members. It could be students, friends in your classroom, whoever it is that you are close with in that way. All right, what about the next layer, the mesosystem? Can you think of a time that your parents' relationship with your siblings affected you? Or your parents' relationship with your friends affected you? That's a weirder question, but it does happen. So some pictures, some things that came to mind for me. If you think of the Kardashians, I think you can definitely see times when Kris Jenner's relationship with one of the other girls affects one of their siblings. That would be mesosystem. This one here from, oh goodness, from Modern Family. I can't believe I spaced on the name of that show. But anyway, so in Modern Family, let me get my laser pointer. Here we have Haley. Haley's parents, the way they feel about her boyfriend Dylan affects Haley. That is your mesosystem. So let's look at this a little bit more broadly. What is your mesosystem? How the relationships among people in your microsystem affect you. So that makes sense if we look over here at our mesosystem. So, for instance, family. The way your family interacts with your school or your teachers affects you in the classroom. The way your friends interact with your family can affect you, and so on. All right, so the next level of Bronfenbrenner's model is the exosystem. So can decisions from things like your local school board affect you? Or how about your parents' workplace? Well, those things can impact you as well. It's just more of an indirect influence. So with what's been happening lately with COVID, so the school board, the superintendent, they're all having to make decisions about Are we online? Are we hybrid? What are we doing with our students? Those decisions trickle down and affect you. Same thing with your parents' workplace. If your parents have a very stressful job, if they get laid off, if they're having difficulties with their boss, that can trickle down and affect you because it affects that person in your microsystem. So the exosystem. Social settings that affect you indirectly. So what do I mean by indirectly? What I mean is, so your parent's workplace has a direct influence on your parent. Then because it affects your parent, it affects you. The school board or the school system has a direct impact on your teachers. Your teachers are in your microsystem, and then it affects you, okay? So that's your exosystem. Here's some other examples of types of exosystems you might have. Extended family members. We mentioned school boards, social service agencies, planning commissions, and how that might trickle down and affect you, and so on. But again, they are social settings, not individuals. All right, so for our last realm of Bronfenbrenner's model, can you think of a time that politics, media, or even the greater society of living in the United States has affected you? Wow, 2020 and 2021 are the year that I think you might be able to see this more than ever. So let's forget about COVID. How about politics? How about social media? I think you all have really seen how, and this is called our macro system, can affect you as well. It is the larger society that you're living in, and it's a shared society with other people within your lower levels, all the way down to your microsystem. So by living in the United States, how a political election might impact you, how the role of social media might impact you, and so on. So put all this together, and this is Bronfenbrenner's model. Now, lo and behold, he also even has another layer of it, which is time, but we don't need to get that in detailed with it. So I thought I'd just give you a couple examples here. So can you match Bronfenbrenner's layer with an example on the side? So how about you start with mesosystem? Which one of these seems to best fit with the mesosystem? If you're looking through your notes, the thing you might want to see or highlight is the word relationship, right? So mesosystem could be how your parents interact with your teacher. All right, so next we have exosystem. That's a social setting that indirectly impacts you. That could be your church. When decisions are made at your church, it might trickle down and affect you. All right, now we have your microsystem, your closest knit group. Who's in that? Well, that one might be a bit more obvious. Perhaps I gave it away. Your siblings. And then last but not least, your macrosystem, the larger society that we are all living in. All right, so here's a video animation to try to bring this point home.
Let's learn about Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems model. This model explains how a child's development is affected by their social relationships and the world around them. We will use my friend Darla as an example.
We will start with the microsystem. The microsystem includes those who are closest to me. This obviously includes my parents due to their direct influence on my life. This also includes my high school and my superhero friends that helped me fight crime. And it includes my neighbors, the zombos. They have some great barbecues during the summer. Next is the mesosystem. As I was saying,
the mesosystem consists of the interactions between the parts of your microsystem.
An example is the relationship between my parents and my friends. They don't like my friends, which can make it hard to be a superhero. Next is the exosystem.
The exosystem includes settings that have an indirect influence on you.
This is where my mom works. It is part of my exosystem because what happens to her at work has an indirect impact on me. My exosystem also includes the evil layer of my nemesis. My school superintendent's office is also in my exosystem because decisions made here affect my school and teachers. Finally, we have my macrosystem.
The macrosystem includes the cultural environment and systems in which you live.
Growing up as a United States citizen is part of my macro system, and our customs and traditions too.
Finally, we have the chronosystem. This includes transitions and events that occur over time during your life.
And that is Bronfenbrenner's model.
All right, so I know that was a little bit cheesy. I actually made that myself on a site called goanimate.com. There are a lot of interesting sites out there where you can create cartoons or animated videos for topics that you can't otherwise find videos of. So, all right, let's wrap this up. How do we apply this? As a teacher, how can I use Bronfenbrenner's model? So Bronfenbrenner's model can be used to really help us understand our students' learning environment. Remember, that's what this unit is all about, understanding our students, and to establish a quality learning environment for those students. So first of all, you need to recognize, as their teacher, you, bing, 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 you're now part of their microsystem. So whatever you do has a direct impact on your students. If you have a good day or a bad day, it impacts your students. So this can be a good reminder about the importance of being a good role model and a positive influence for your students. Also, another way you can apply this, I'm going to go level at a time. So that was microsystem. Now mesosystem, you're in their mesosystem too. You have to have a good relationship with their parent because your relationship with their parent affects the student. Over here, I just saw this article from the Association of Middle Level Education talking about how during COVID, teachers can try to reach out to parents and develop a good relationship, which I thought was touching upon the mesosystem. All right, that next layer is the exosystem, right? You need to understand that changes in the school impact your student personally. So whether that is changes with the athletic schedule, for instance, there's a large problem currently in 2020 and 2021 with depression in K through 12 students, which could be a part of the lack of social interaction, the lack of sports. So changes in the school impact the student. I saw this and I wanted to share it. So this is a letter from a superintendent near my hometown. And I love this. So there was a snow day coming up. This was, middle of the term in December. And I know a lot of superintendents were struggling with how to handle it. Do we still have the kids do virtual learning? We're in the middle of things. What do we do? And this superintendent sent out a letter to everyone and said, you know what? We are going to be closed for everybody because it's the first snow day of the year, closed for virtual, closed for staff. It's been a rough year. Everyone go home and have fun. And I thought, wow, this is a superintendent who really gets the idea of the exosystem and their role. And then finally, when it comes to the macro system, that you might want to consider discussing issues that are going on within the macro system in an age-appropriate way, because you know those things impact your students. And I'm sure you all have seen post after post about how teachers are discussing COVID, how teachers are discussing different political issues, because again, they are living in this macro system as well. All right, so thank you so much for your attention and your participation. And that was the first part of looking at Chapter 2. Thank you.